Welcome to the Corporate Venturing Insider Series. Today we have Tammy from Verizon Ventures. I'm very excited about what we are going to learn from Tammy. Tammy, would you mind maybe spending 5-10 minutes to share your personal journey into corporate venturing?
Sure. So first of all, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure. I've watched the previous Insider series, and it's great to be here.
Thank you.
I've been around in Verizon Ventures for 2.5 years now, but I think my journey started like many Israelis in the army, actually. So I was part of the intelligence unit, one of the elite intelligence units that a lot of the startups come from. And that was kind of where I was first experienced like the power of technology. And I think that kind of stayed with me for a while. I then moved to doing other things. I went to school and then I joined McKinsey, which I think gave me a really good and solid background about kind of the challenges that companies go through and accompany them throughout these challenges. And then I made that switch to the VC community. And for the past, I think it's over 17 years now, I've been a part of the Israeli ecosystem, but always in financial funds. So this is really kind of my first corporate experience. And I'm just loving this because, I've seen the ecosystem throughout the years. I think in 17 years, I've went through several downtimes. There was a lot of changes, a lot of revolutions in the way that this is kind of very exciting for me. So I started actually with a fund called Evergreen. It no longer exists. It sort of evolved to another fund, but this was the first VC that was started in Israel. So this kind of gave me a great perspective into this new industry for me. I really transitioned from consulting, and it was great. So I met sort of the polar opposite of the companies that McKinsey works with. These were all tiny little startups. And then I moved to Pitanga, which is the largest fund in Israel by AUM. Again, sort of different challenges, bigger partnership. It was all different for me. But I learned a lot, and I then moved to really sort of my first experience. It's not a real corporate fund, but it was investing on behalf of a company. So it was a Swiss-Israeli company, and that was looking for innovation. That was kind of like the first notion that I had of what the power of investing on behalf of the company could be. And then I partnered with 3 Israeli companies and try to help them find a way into investing in startup companies around the whole topic of agri and food tech. So that was kind of like the lead for me. I'm kind of shortening that 17 to 20 years into finally arriving at Verizon Ventures, which is, where I am today, and I'm proud to represent here in Israel.
Very nice. I would like to double click a little bit. First, Israel is a startup ecosystem and nation. And clearly you have a lot going on for Israel. But one thing you mentioned, which I think is important, is the army. Not just about technology, but I want you to maybe share that or not. The fact that women also goes to the army create a leadership bench that goes into these startups. Could you share a bit about your view about how much of the army becomes something so valuable to the startups ecosystem and VC ecosystem?
Absolutely. I think that the reason that I mentioned it is because, first of all, I think that, you in Israel, the mandatory service is when you finish high school. So that puts you at 18. You're usually very young. You got a lot of energy and you're quick to learn. And as you mentioned, it's, men and women serve in these units. We serve together. And I think Israel, because of its unique kind of position, the intelligence army, the intelligence corp is actually pretty important to it. So a lot of the budget, the army budget, goes to these units. And I always say, if you take good people, give them challenges and throw a lot of money to get them to solve it, it really creates something. And I think definitely, that's definitely true for the, at least in the beginning of the VC ecosystem. If you look at sort of the mid 90s, when it started here in Israel, a lot of these startup companies were people that kind of were discharged from the army and basically taken some of the ideas that they encountered and developed them basically outside of the army. So if you look at instant messaging, that was developed in the army, and then that was kind of transcended to a company that was later sold to AOL, right? But it was different. I think it's that kind of mindset that you're always sort of measured on the innovation that you can bring and what you need to do in order to really kind of make that, the Israel kind of stand out in that sense. A lot of it is around cybersecurity, but a lot of other domains as well. And I think the other aspect is, again, kind of relates to where Israel is with the lack of natural resources. Almost the only thing that Israel has is human capital.
Yeah.
I think that's a lot of it is changing. So I think that the borders are now more open. There are a lot of agreements between Israel and its neighboring countries. But if you look at that, the thing that you can transfer most easily is technology, right? It's software, it's the internet things. So that was kind of a lot of the investment the government had was around these areas. So it was around, okay, let's get good people, let's, get investments. And there was time where the Israeli government was actually funding and matching all the funds that were funneling to the, so-called VC. It was very small at the time, but for every dollar that was poured in, the government put another dollar. So you had good people from various sources, academia, the army for sure, a lot of sort of hands-on experience, and then you brought in the government funding. And I think together that kind of created or gave that initial boost to the ecosystem in a country that, did not have that until then. So that was, I think, the start. And I think from that evolution, came out, Israel is sort of nicknamed Startup Nation. Yep. I think today is sort of even kind of moved up into being termed the Scale-Up Nation, because a lot of the sort of first generation startups that were, a lot of them were acquired. Just in Israel alone, we have over, I think, 350 multinationals that have R&D centers. So these people, started gaining experience from working with global, huge corporates. And I think that kind of transitioned the companies to that next level, which is really building companies and growing them, not just selling them early on. So yeah, it's quite an exciting ecosystem, I think.
Very nice. And we'll go into why Verizon Ventures, which is a US operators, have you in Israel. So we'll cover that. But on top of this formative opportunity in the army, then you went to what could be called the best school for thinking, which is McKinsey. How much of that time in McKinsey is useful to you today?
I think, like you said, I think McKinsey is probably one of the best schools that you can have. And I credit a lot of my career at what I learned at McKinsey, which is basically, I think, first of all, getting people from a lot of different industries. I mean, I had teams where we had, somebody that used to study volcanoes in Hawaii, along with somebody who studied theology, and I studied chemistry and physics, right? So none of us were sort of typical financial consultants. And again, I think what McKinsey gives you is the skill set of, coming for a very short period of time, getting a lot of understanding about the lay of the land. What are the different problems, champions, what can help you solve this? And then working alongside with the internal teams to actually come up with a solution. Right. And later on, obviously, you need to implement it. But I think that is kind of, for me, has been a part of the journey of being an investor. I think for us, we see a lot of companies. We need to understand in a relatively short time, is it interesting? Is it not? Is that the right time or not? And then once you decide about a certain target, is this an interesting company? then you need to dive down and do it fairly quickly, right? Because the market is not waiting for you. You need to make that decision. And I think that the other part of it that McKinsey kind of puts a lot of emphasis on is working with sort of the customer teams. Now, for me now at Verizon, that for me means the internal teams, right? I need to find the internal champions. So kind of how do you get them to look at innovation? How do you look at, kind of bringing them together and being a part of it and really up to owning it, right? So just kind of say, okay, now I own that innovation. It's true that you guys made the investment, but that strategic value is going to come from me, and now I own it. So I think that for me kind of signifies a lot of what I've done. And I think, again, with McKinsey, you work with global companies. And I think that's definitely for somebody who came from Israel. And up until then, I was at school. I was doing my master's degree. That for me has been a fantastic type of education and experience.
It's a golden nugget for me, because I did expect it would help you to become a better investor, deep diving quickly and assessing whether it's a good investment or not. But you're also talking about the value of communicating the value of the startup back to the mothership. And do you have a framework or a blueprint that you use to actually communicate the value of the startups back to the mothership?
I think that's an excellent question. I don't think I have a blueprint, but I think that it's kind of like, for me, if I look at my day-to-day, I think most of the time that I spend internally. I spend getting to know the people, getting to know the challenges, trying to understand what motivates them, and at the same time, what they can get from this company, right? I think it's this process. You need to understand your stakeholders, what they're looking for. I mean, ideally, they would come to us and say, that's what I need. Can you go find me something? But it doesn't work that way. And there are certain organizational, definitely when you're talking huge corporates, there are definitely a lot of education that you need to do about what it is you're doing, where you are, what are the companies that you're looking at, and then study from kind of what worked and kind of see that person is interested for this or that person is interested in that, and kind of see, again, what their motivation is. Are they looking to extend, kind of looking at things from a high perspective, or 30 feet up? Do they want to make something bigger than what they're doing today? What the role is today? Are they thinking of the startup as a mean to get to the next quarter quotas? I mean, can that add to them, right? It could be like a multitude of reasons.
Yep.
And it's like identifying those people and what motivates them. That kind of, I think, what helps us in our day-to-day. And I spend most of the time on that. So really, I think it's super important for us to do it.
And it's so important to understand, especially for people who want to go into a corporate VC. Just to give us a feel, Verizon is a big company, but how many distinct teams are you engaging with?
A lot would be a high rough number, but I think we talk with, definitely within the three big Verizon groups. So we have the technology group, we have the business, which is the equivalent of the enterprise group, and we have the consumer. And within those, we're probably talking to about 4 teams in each business unit.
That's a lot.
I'd say around 10 to 12 groups. And we try to engage with more on every single day. Like, I think part of what I like about working in such a big corporate is that I learn new things every single day, like the Verizon does. It's amazing. Like the one, I think it was the other day that I learned that we're doing some sort of NFTs. So we were handing them out at the games. That Verizon is a big part of the sports industry and provides the communications and to stadiums, and that was surprising. There's somebody at Verizon that does NFT. I mean, that was for me a revelation, right? So it's like, it's those things that you learn every single day. And 2.5 years, and I keep finding out new things, and it makes me excited about it.
And it's not just one person in a corner doing NFT, it's actually being deployed as a product. Wow.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Which probably means now you can really look actively at innovations with startups working on NFTs.
I try to look, I think that's kind of the unique perspective that we have versus the mothership, is that we have a broad perspective, right? So we look at things, we try to identify areas of interest that may not interest the corporate today, but are going to be interesting in 3, 4, 5 years ahead, right? And not only that, but we look at different domains. So yes, they're looking at NFT today. We've been looking at NFT, 2 years ago, and what's that's going to happen, right? And some other things. And then we also look of where that can connect, and we also see what our friends at different corporates are doing, right? So we have this, I think, unique vision that provides a lot of value to our corporates.
Yeah,
Right? So,
different vision, different perspective, and clearly a wider spectrum of options. I want to go back quickly on your personal journey. One thing I like is this small to big and big to small. So you worked with very big customers when you were at McKinsey. Then you work with very small companies, startups when you move to VCs. You move from a small VC to a very big VC and now a corporate VC. Can you share a bit more about this time you spent as a financial VC and how it shapes you as now a corporate VC, which has a much bigger remit than just the financial returns?
absolutely. I think for me, working in the financial funds, I think, all funds will tell you that they're value add investors. And it's
Mm.
true. I think always by having somebody external to the company, you're able to bring value.
Yep.
I think, but the one thing that was missing for me is really being able to impact the companies, right? So yes, we get financial returns. Sometimes they're better, sometimes they're worse, but kind of we generate more of the same. But I think for me, the key element that was missing was the market. And I think that's what a corporate fund is all about, is actually bringing the market to the companies.
Yep.
You're really able to change their future, right? When we invest in a company, we bring that entire monster Verizon behind us, right? At a flick of a button, we can bring them to millions of users, right? If you look at our consumer group, we can bring them to all our customers, like from the enterprise group, right? So we can bring like value in a way that nowhere in the financial world could you do it,
Yep.
right? And again, I think without that, you're not going to have good financial returns. You need to have more of us investing. And it's not just the financial investing. I think that's kind of our least contribution to the company, because that can be found elsewhere. Our dollar is no different than the financial fund dollar.
Yep.
But when we bring our true strategic value, I think that's when the magic happens. And I think for me, that was always missing. I wanted to connect the companies, right? So I would try. I remember as a financial investor, I used to talk to our LPs and try to get, the portfolio company connected to those LPs that were corporates. But that was very, very limited. I can connect them to our point of contact, right? But today I can put them in touch with that person that, cares deeply about what it is they're doing and can really make that difference. So I think that for me, and again, I think it's also like, a matter of being, a personality. So I think I like to connect people. I think it's always been important to me that creating that network effect, getting my teams to collaborate with startups and big corporates. So that was, I think for me, a perfect fit.
I love what you said, and it carries so much more weight because you did so long into financial VCs. And now you're saying this superpower that the mothership brings is when magic happens. And I also like you talk about impact. And at TDK Ventures, we call the entrepreneurs the ultimate impact scalers because they want to bring positive impact and scale it to society, to the planet. And so maybe you could share a little bit about what it is concretely that you can bring to your portfolio companies that you wish you had when you were a financial VC.
I think that the benefits from Verizon Ventures are three-way, right? So one, we could be the customer, right?
Yep.
And I think if you look at, as far as telcos go, right, we're tier one telco in the US, we're the pioneers of 5G, right? So if companies are looking to do something in that domain, they should come talk to us. So one is us as a customer, and then we can be a channel, and we can also be like, a sell-through model, right? Or sell with. So we can actually partner with you or be a channel. So I think, first of all, understanding that distinction, understanding what it is that we need from that startup, and what's the rationale for us to invest versus just creating some sort of, we could look at commercial agreements, right? We can bring companies and say, okay, let's strike a commercial agreement. It makes sense. And in some cases it does. I don't think all the companies that we see turn out to be investments. I think, in fact, we probably, if you look at the number of companies that we see versus the number that we invest in, the investments are the minorities. But I think in those unique cases where we not only identify what the startup can benefit us, but we understand what we can do for them, I think that's kind of creates that synergy.
Yep.
That is very, very unique. And I think that first of all, I did not understand it as well as I do now before. Because as a financial fund, you're like, show me the new logos for the month or for the quarter, show me a pipeline, show me percentages of, success rate or whatever, but you're looking at metrics. And I think there's a lot of art, not science, behind kind of the way that startups work with big corporates. And I think that's kind of, for me, something that I completely learned, and I didn't know that. And I think that really makes a difference.
I love what you say about these three places you can help the startups, because they're all about making their business more successful. And it's all about non-dilutive funding. It's revenue. It's growing their revenue and their opportunity to deploy their product. When you were a financial VC, did you have a chance to work with corporate VCs and see the bad and the good? And if you could go back in time, how would you, as a financial VC, decides to engage with corporate VCs?
I think at the time when I was at a financial fund, I think a lot of times we were hesitant in some cases of getting a strategic investor, because it would say, okay, if you're going to be affiliated with a certain company, that may impact your ability to fundraise over time. I think that was one of my biggest concerns. But I think that always the positive thing that I saw at corporate funds, which I still see today, is that I think definitely for Verizon Ventures, where we really invest in things that are strategic to us, if we make the decision to invest, I think that company has a better chance to succeed than in other cases. Because if somebody that truly understands the market decides to invest, they know something that you as a financial fund do not know.
Yep.
Or that element is missing. So by the way, when we typically invest, and we invest alongside a lot of other good financial funds, we try to, we're trying to be always open and share our, kind of key findings and connect them to the people at Verizon so they can hear kind of the feedback that we've been getting, right? So I think I always appreciated that, but now I appreciate it even more.
Right.
And that's, I think, really is because, if a company, I think it's a unique position for a startup to be, that a company like, Verizon can actually appreciate what they're doing and say, okay, we need that. I think that's a very strong signal to the market.
Now, of course, you're implying that you're going to deliver value, which probably means that even before you make the investments, you work very closely with a relevant business group or business units to commit to support. And so how do you ensure this? Is it by them having to champion the investments or commit some of their resources? How do you ensure that you can deliver on that promise?
I think it's both. So I first of all I identified the right teams, and I think that's a process. I mean, we try. I think we as a company, we as Verizon Ventures, we typically invest in A and B, but I try to get earlier stage companies and introduce them to Verizon. I think these things take time. By the way, I think that's one of the things that I always tell startups. It's not at the same pace. You need to understand it's a big mechanism. You need to move it. It doesn't move in that same kind of pace.
Mm-hmm.
So I introduce them to the right teams. I try to get the discussions going. I think first benefit is connecting to the right people. A small startup trying to find its way in the dark of finding that right person, approaching from LinkedIn or from other way.
Very hard.
Right. Yep. So first of all is like, let me get you to that right person. Once you do that introduction, okay, now let's see how can that work. And there's a lot of internal work. So it's like talking with the internal champions, getting them excited about this, and then getting the startup to understand. I think there's a lot of times startups, and I think that's the beautiful things about them. These are people with vision. I don't think that they always listen to what's being said in the meetings. And I think there's this corporate lingo that you need to understand.
Translate.
For sure. And when things are interesting, that does not mean that things are going to happen next week, right? It's like, okay, let's start a discussion. So I think there's a lot of work around that. So kind of getting people from the startup and from the corporate to being more committed. It's again kind of addressing all the questions. Sometimes they don't feel comfortable saying things to the startup. So we are kind of in the way and trying to negotiate on behalf of both sides. And again, kind of keeping that relationship going until the time where I think we feel that they can be internal champions. So when they're going to get asked about it, they're going to say, that's the solution we're looking for. And I think kind of that from there follows, POCs or whatever else happens. But for sure, that's I think that's the way to pave something to success.
And I think what you're describing is this very delicate, complex, and yet so rewarding value creation, which takes time. And I think what you've just said is very important, is you do explain to the entrepreneurs, you need time to build this value and these connections. And how do you find this messaging? Or do you have any tips about how to message correctly to the entrepreneurs the value that you're creating, but that it needs time, when most entrepreneurs want to do the fundraising and then move on?
Right. I think what I learned, and that I think I learned that in VC like many years ago. I had a very good mentor, and I think like the key thing to almost any kind of discussion is being upfront and honest, and just saying, that's the way it's going to happen, right? And I'm also, when people are saying, we're looking to close the round within a week, I'm saying, okay, it's not going to happen. Yep. So just so you know, we that's not the pace that we work in. A week is nothing close to what we need, but let me do this and this. And I try to be as clear as possible in what I can do. Yep. I tell them who I'm going to try to communicate with, and then I'm going to tell them like which groups within Verizon. I try to tell them like, next steps or kind of visible next steps. And again, kind of keeping that clear all the time. So I think it's also kind of a way for them to gain more trust that we're engaged. We didn't disappear after saying it's very interesting, but we're talking to these people. That's who we want to connect with. And again, trying to be transparent along the way, and just try to explain that, things happen differently in a corporate. Luckily, I think a lot of the teams today have folks that already worked in a corporate, so they have some way to relate to what I'm saying. But I always try to say, look, I think patience is a virtue in this case. So we may not be good for the investment in this round, but we'll gather enough, we'll bring enough value and gather enough data points for us to be a good candidate to invest in your next round.
Yeah. To the point where they want you to be part of the next round.
Exactly. I think we demonstrated that we can bring enough value to them. And we actually bring a lot of value to Verizon in the process, because even that process brings value to the organization. And again, for us, that's like a win-win-win, because we get a lot of data points and we get the champions and we get the startup to, I think, put up with all the crazy corporate stuff that we need to go through. So I think it just creates a better partnership.
Very nice. Now, I also want to talk about something you mentioned earlier, which is something all financial VCs know, but it could be even a double whammy for corporate VCs, which is a downturn times. Financial VCs experience it very quickly, but for corporate VCs, it's the same, plus potentially the mothership feeling the downturn. Anything you've learned from previous downturn for the current conditions today?
I think for us, it's always been, if you look at what happened, I think in the last year and a half where things were crazy, I think we did not join that party. I think what really kind of protects us as a corporate fund is the fact that we stick to a very strict strategy, right? So only things that are related to Verizon, can go to that SIFT. And I think when you look at that, there are not that many opportunities. So for us, it's true that we feel the stress like everybody else. I think we feel it more internally, in the sense that people may be sort of less willing to look at innovation in that same kind of capacity, because they're thinking about their next quarter more intensely than they did before. But I think in terms of number of investments, I think for us, we kept it pretty much steady over, the last probably decade. So I think it's like, with downturns, again, I think my best advice to and I say it to all my friends as well, I think is sticking to strategy. Do what you always do. Do the companies that, need you and you can add value and can actually help you in the downturns, right? Because I think innovation is there because of that, right? Because if you partner with a company and now you can offer more value-add services to your customer, and maybe that can be $1 or $2 that you charge more, but they suddenly have a reason to stick with you and you're giving them more for that. That helps you, right? So it's that relationship. So I think for us, it's not really been that impactful in the sense of investments or the number of investments per se, because we usually do like a dozen a year. But I think for the enterprise as a whole.
I think it's a golden nugget again. Stick to the strategy, your investment criteria, what you stand for. I actually like the analogy of going through the SIFT. It kind of implies you're being very strict and disciplined, and that discipline doesn't change over time. Is there anything, so you talked a lot about the positive of a corporate VC. When you joined your CVC, did you find anything that you wish was different? And maybe you changed it?
I'm not sure that I was able to make a lot of change yet. I think it's positive, because I think really overall the concept of corporate funds is very significant. I think the problem that we have is, again, I think that we sometimes, because it's a big corporate, we take longer. I think investment decisions, we can't make them in a week or two. So in some cases, I think we can't compete. But I think, if you look at, like now, which when it's a downturn, I think these companies will be back. I don't think there've been many, right? Because again, I think if you're a company that has 5G in mind, you will want to come talk to Verizon. But again, I think it's, kind of the insane valuations that we had, but I think that's going to flip, right? That's going to flip. But I think timing is definitely not our strongest suit. So we take longer. And And I think the other thing that I was surprised is that, organizations, even as big as Verizon, tend to have sometimes a lot of moving parts, which surprised me. Um, I don't think that's impacting too much, but it's definitely something to consider. So it could be that the person that you're talking to one day is now not responsible for that anymore. So they hand this over, something that would not happen in financial funds. You have a very small team, relatively small teams, so it doesn't happen often. So
I think you're making a compelling case that when you do invest in a company, it's a very strong signal to the outside that this company has something valuable that's likely to be deployed, potentially with Verizon and maybe others. So I think that positive signal is important. If we look at decision making now, how do you make your decisions to invest or not to invest? And I'm not talking necessarily about investment criteria, more how do you involve your team, the external teams inside Verizon? Do you have an investment committee, or do you decide everything inside Verizon Ventures? How does that work?
So our team is very small. We have 14 professionals. We're spread around 3 locations. So obviously Basking Ridge, which is Verizon's headquarter. Other than Basking Ridge, we have Palo Alto in the States and then in Israel. Right. So it's a very small team. And I think that we make all these investment decisions as a team.
Nice.
So we ultimately roll up to the CFO. We're part of the CFO organization. We don't have a big investment committee. Really, it's a matter of kind of a team decision to make the case for this investment. And then we reported to the CFO and kind of give him a brief, say 15-minute presentation about what this company is. But I think reaching that decision point involves a lot of internal work. So we do a lot of work with the internal teams. So, each of the business units got their own strategy unit. There's also a strategy unit in and by itself, right? So kind of 4 different strategy units. And then we talk to the teams inside those units, right? So I think by the time we sort of get that unanimous internal agreement, I think we've talked to a lot of people internally. And I think one of the really, for me, and I think that probably any corporate fund that has multiple locations like us, I think enjoys, is having people around the globe really helps us avoid the blind side, right? So if I see a really exciting company, and then I have my friends in Silicon Valley say, "Oh, have you looked at this company?" Right? It's sort of competing. And then our friends at the East Coast say, "We've seen something like that." That really helps kind of flesh things out, right? So it's like, let's get together and as a group bring that collective wisdom and that knowledge of different markets that we can, right? So I think it really helps us make better decisions as a team.
Very nice. And you're making a very strong case on geographical diversity. But before we go there, and I do want to go there, you just mentioned that you're looking for a team decision. You talk about unanimous consensus. Does that not create a risk of going for the obvious versus the less obvious investments? And here I'm thinking about contrarian view versus consensus view.
I think it probably does create that, but I think it's, again, a matter of time, right? There are times where I think kind of we look at things differently, and, there's different people at the business units where they're more open to things that are going to happen 5 years down the line, and we can invest in something that's a bit more risky. And then there's some places, where we say, okay, we're going to invest in things that are a bit more obvious.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think because 5G is so new and so groundbreaking, I don't think any of the investments we've made could be obvious yet, right? Or not obvious successes yet. There's a lot to go and do yet in these cases. So, but yeah, I think for us it served us well. I don't think, definitely in the 2.5 years that I've been a part of, I can't think of an example where people did not, argue the case. I mean, people bring up good questions, and I lean on the experience of my colleagues. I mean, some of them have been here at Verizon for much longer than me. They understand the corporate. I think that's kind of the nature of building a good partnership, where you can trust them to ask the hard questions. And it's fine if I can't defend the investment, then something is wrong. Hopefully, I make the compelling case, but I think asking the hard questions is really our job.
Yeah, it definitively is. Now, let's talk about geographical coverage. You made a good case earlier, but let's start very simply. Verizon in US, why Israel?
I think it really happened historically when Verizon acquired AOL and Yahoo. So at the time, AOL had an incubator here in Israel. So I think when Verizon acquired that, they were aware that there is, some sort of an investment vehicle here in Israel. But I think that when they acquired it, they sort of kind of noticed. I'm not sure like noticed is the right word, but they became aware of the ecosystem in Israel, which is really the second largest after the US. Right. So there's a lot of things here that Israel is very known for. And I think kind of caught Verizon's eye. So cybersecurity kind of being the obvious, but a lot of deep tech, again, human capital. That's what the state of Israel has. No natural resources. So I think they kind of, again, I think that was kind of a startup or entrepreneurial movement, but they said, okay, let's start Verizon Ventures in Israel. So that was really started 4.5 years ago. We've made 13 investments to date. Wow. Out of the, that's just out of Israel. But I think that as the years kind of transition from that initial decision, I think they see more and more the value of that. If you look at Israel, I think a lot of probably the Fortune 100 CEOs have been here, and they come here regularly on extended periods to see innovation and to see startups. So I think that really kind of, they appreciate it more over time.
Actually, 13 is very impressive. How many of these 13 are in engagement at different levels already with Verizon?
Well, first of all, some of them are already exited. So
congrats.
So we were happy and sad because now it's like, sort of out of our hands in a way. But I would say we probably get 20% to a third, pretty much, that are engaged with Verizon at different levels. But we sort of scroll through this every time. So every time we hear about, a new group or, a person that's changed, and we try to pitch this again. It's an ongoing sort of process for us.
Yeah, you are the continuous champion of the startups.
Absolutely. And there are ones that are, connected. I think sort of we have one company that's already connected to 7 groups, right? So, and I think more are coming, right? Because we always try, and I think they also do a great job. I think they understood the values. They're like, is there a group at Verizon that does this? Could we try to get connected to them? So I think it's really an ongoing process. But it's also for us. I think that's a real value creation. I think when we invest, I think we try to, or at least that's what I do. I think I need to prove my value every single day from scratch, right? So I put in the money. Okay, I sold you something, right? For me, bringing you strategic value. Now I need to deliver on that. And I make it my mission to bring that value.
I love the way you say it. It's, you have to deliver on the value, and you pitched it, and you have to make sure it happens. How do you track all of these engagements? And do you have someone dedicated to do it, or is it the team as a whole who looks at tracking the progress of these engagements?
It's the team as a whole. We don't have anyone that's really dedicated for that, but I think we all track our portfolio, and we do it both ways. So again, like talking to the internal teams as well as talking to the startups. Have you talked to someone else? Have they referred you to someone else, right? So a lot of time that's the way things happen, right? They connect to one team and say, oh, you need to talk to that person. So when we, other than the board meetings, we're in regular contacts with the CEOs. I have regular meetings with all my CEOs, and I'm like, okay, so did you get introduced to somebody else? Then I make it my point to meet that person, understand where the engagement is coming. And again, we try to we do it, I think, in the most simplistic way, where we have this giant Excel. We keep all the point of contacts and kind of where things are. Shared by the whole team so everybody can see. And that's the way we track it. We probably should have been more tech about it, but that's just the way we do it.
Wow, a master Excel spreadsheet is not what I expected.
No, I know.
Very nice. So back to the geo concept, what happens when you find a really good startup into a space in Israel and someone in Palo Alto finds the same type of startups in the Bay Area? How do you decide who's driving the investment? I'm assuming you're not going to invest in competing startups necessarily. So how do you handle this type of, two people wanting different things, but in the same space?
I think luckily we've not come across these sort of situations often, but I would say that I think the first split is geographic and the second one is domain.
Okay.
Right. So if I have a colleague of mine who's doing a lot of network investments and I see a really good network company here in Israel, I think we'll do it together. Because I think there's a lot of the knowledge that's part of, the local ecosystem. You need to know the culture, you need to know the partners, but then there's the domain. And I think ultimately, if it's an interesting company and we want what's best for it and what's best for Verizon, then we'll share this. And I think the one thing that you can say about our team is that I don't think we have a lot of ego. So
That's
people
right.
are willing to share. And, I think just from a kind of practical matter, it's that it doesn't make sense for me to do an investment in the US. So I think unless it's like, an Israeli entrepreneur in the US, in which case I may be involved. But other than that, I think we really kind of do our own thing, but we try to help each other.
So you tag team when it makes sense, but otherwise you don't.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So we're talking about the team. So any best practices or tips to the audience about recruitment and what type of profile makes more sense for a corporate VC versus not?
I think what I would start first and foremost, I think you need to understand corporate culture. It's not flashy like the financial funds where people are like, oh, I'm going to get rich, or that's not the corporate life, right? So I think you need to understand what it means to work in a corporate in terms of both what it is that you're driving, what it is you're delivering, and definitely the pace of the work, right? So I think that you need to understand. In terms of the kind of best practices, I think I've seen people from all sorts of backgrounds. So financial funds, business development, strategy, just people that, came out from the business, right? They know the business well, and they want to sort of move on from just the business to looking at things from an investment perspective. So I think really all of that would work as long as you understand kind of where you're landing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So know the landscape, try to interview people, ask them about how it is they spend their days, right? I think, for me, it was very helpful when I came in and the person that I asked said, I'm doing a lot of internal corporate development and external, right? So for me, it was okay. It was something that I didn't do. I did not talk to potential, that there's nothing like that in the financial funds. There's no comparable, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's like really pretty much like you would do in any other job. Try to interview as many people as you can to understand what it takes. But I think if you got a good background, in strategy, business development, investments, or you know your business very well. So for instance, for Verizon, if you know networks very well, I think these are all great places to start. And I think if you get excited by innovation, right? So that's just kind of being in this business anyways, right? You need to be excited about innovation, about creating new things. And if you have that, definitely something you need to pursue.
Very nice. Now, one more thing which is different for corporate VCs and financial VCs is the side letters that comes with an investment. And they vary very differently between CVCs, but can you give a framework of mind about how to think about side letters for a corporate VC and how to explain them to the entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point. I think you're touching something that, we come across every single investment that we make, pretty much every single investment. Um, and I think the best way to describe it is, again, being very upfront and
Mm.
very honest. So for me, it's explaining to the startup, to the CEO, what it is that we need. What kind of, where does that come from, and why do we need it? And sometimes we say, look, we understand if you're going to take this, let's say we're asking for information rights, right? We understand that, it may not come as something with this kind of investment level, but this is why we need it, right? And we understand, and we say to them, look, we understand if we stop investing at one point or another, that you can take this off, right? That sort of always is the premise. As long as we continue to be your partner, this is what we need and why we need it. And I think I've not come across situations where when we have this discussion, I mean, they can talk. I mean, we can negotiate on the thresholds for things, but it's not a matter where they can dismiss it completely and say, okay, we're not willing to give that. So I think, again, being very honest of what you need and why you need it. And again, I think startups want to work with us, or the ones that find that strategic alignment want to work with us. So
yeah. And we say with us, I think it's with Verizon. There is clearly a lot of value from engaging with Verizon. And maybe here a question also is about how do you manage the pre-investment engagement, like priming the pump in a way, and post-investment? Is it a continuous process, or do you see a difference from the before and after an investment stage?
I think it's always easier when a company becomes a portfolio, because then we can say, look, you have pretty much like, an inherent or joint alignment to have this as a success, right? Because we're invested in the company, right? So you want it to be successful. So I think it's just always kind of easier to say, look, we're investing in them. Definitely, I think I find it more easy kind of across the different units that we're talking to, not internally in the ventures team. Because, if it's a company we want to invest in and we're kind of bullish about it, that's not going to change because we made the investment. But I think it's an easier sell to the organization. And I think also for the startup, I mean, there's some commitment already. So when we ask them things and we ask them to, join multiple calls that are not necessarily going to end up in something meaningful for them, it also create that goodwill, right? So I think that's kind of where I see the difference between before and after, but not for us in ventures.
Very nice. And so my last question is going to be about what's next for you. But before that, does this requirement for adding value and this engagement, does it mean that you actually can't invest in what's coming in 5 or 10 years, like 6G? Is that so far out that actually can't invest, even though it could be helpful for Verizon to know the innovations very early on? Or do you have ways to do that?
I think, look, I think we've not come across these as well, but I think 6G is definitely going to be something of an interest over the next few years. I mean, we've not fully deployed 5G, right? So there's still time to go. I think again, sweet spot is A and B. So I think predominantly that's where we're going to invest. We're not going to invest earlier. And I think that's something, again, that we also need to navigate between the company, right? Because I think we want to invest, let's say A and B. We like to invest early, where I think the business can really work well with kind of a more mature company, right? So we always have that gap that we need to bridge. So I think, again, it will be in some super strategic cases where we say, okay, that's a company where we're willing to take the risk and invest earlier because we believe that's going to, end up there. And I think in some cases that could be, it's not where we're, I think, doing our best. I think we do best where we can involve the business and get more feedback. But because these earlier stages tend to be less money, I think it's kind of a lesser risk in a way for the corporate. So, we can say, okay, we put in this amount. It's, significantly less than what we typically invest, but we sort of believe in this and we kind of want to do that. We've done a few of those, but I think the majority is not going to be these cases. I think it's that balance. I don't know, like a lot of corporates, what they do, just the ones that I talk to. So I'm sort of biased in that, but I think it's that gap between earlier stage of investment versus corporate can work with mature companies that you always try to navigate.
Yeah. I like how you are consistent and you stick to strategy, like you said earlier. Now, my last question is for co-investing partners, including us, and entrepreneurs. Can you share what you're excited about investing in the next 12 to 18 months?
I would say that I think cyber remains super important for me personally, not just because of where I'm located, but because I think 5G will bring a lot of these challenges. I think industry 4.0 or just industry in general is something that we're very, very interested in. AR and VR, key drivers, we're looking at that for productivity, as well as the obvious use cases as entertainment and stuff. Robotics, warehouse management, really everything that's kind of deep tech is of interest. Where it relates, I think kind of we're fortunate in the sense that communication is at the heart of many, many technologies. But if I had to pick, these would be the ones that I would look at.
Very nice overlap with us. So I think we will have a lot of
and
more.
We love to partner. We do that, I think, with a lot of companies. I think we strategic investors try to bring, we know each other, so we always bring each other to the table. So it's always good.
Actually, maybe that's a last question, which is, how do you see the value of corporate VCs getting together to add even more value to the entrepreneurs?
So I think in most of the companies that I have in my portfolio, we actually have more than one strategic partner. And I think that then we can really leverage that corporate network, because we bring different, I can tell you that's, for instance, we have a company that we're invested with PepsiCo as well as Qualcomm, right? But we all look at this company and we can bring value from different aspects. But at the end of the day, we're going to get that company to grow.
Yep.
And somehow, not surprising, all our motherships are connected as well, right? So just naming these companies, we're all connected, right? If you look at Verizon, I think we work with probably all Fortune 500. I think it's maybe 97% last time I looked at it. So we're working with everybody. There's no reason why the venture arms should not do the same, right? So I think that's pretty open, and people have been fantastic. And I think we sort of know the limitations and the value that we can bring better than everyone else. So I think it's one big happy family as far as I see it.
Well, Tammy, I think it's the best way to end this interview. Thank you so much. You've been amazing at sharing candidly your best practices, your journey, and how Verizon Ventures work and think about adding value to entrepreneurs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicolas.